seems like everybody's been hopping on the ESG bandwagon lately. Environmental, social, and governance has been another hot topic at this year's Inside ETF Conference. Problem is everyone has a different idea about how precisely to define it. I know we've talked about this many times. You're in favor of ESG. I'm in favor of ESG, but my ESG is not necessarily your ESG. How do we get this to be a little more quantifiable?
I think that's right. I think the important thing is not nailing it perfectly, because you will never be able to please 100% of the people. I think the important thing is to say, look, this is where I draw my line in the sand. So, for example, I'm conscious of the environment, but I can't have zero exposure to energy. And there's not enough market cap in solar. Right. So I'm going to have some natural gas companies that I think have a good record on taking care of their environmental responsibilities. And then there are some people who are purists that say, no oil whatsoever. You have to decide what is a livable, workable portfolio and do your best. And I think that's okay.
That's a good thing about energy. I get objections. People write to me and say, why is ExxonMobil in this ESG ETF? And I say, well, if you want to exclude that consciously energy, fine. But if you want to include the best energy company that's doing the least damage to the environment, you could get Occidental.
The answer is they are statistically doing a better job than Chevron. And so you'll have Exxon and not Chevron. And if that's not good enough for you, you can go more extreme. But I think we're trying to be nudging things in the right direction, not being perfect.
And really, there's two things here. Do you have one issue that you are really hot on and you want your dollars chasing that? Great. There'll be a fund for that. I think the bigger question is, like we heard from, say, Henry Fernandez at MSCI, capital is being reallocated to firms that are not taking certain risks that we think of as ESG risks, like your exposure to climate change.
And Matt, can we quantify this a little better? We all know a lot of this is very qualitative, quality of how you're governing things like that. Do you see progress being made? And the SEC has sent a letter to everybody saying, you better start telling us exactly what you're doing with these ESG funds and how you're deciding what an ESG fund is. Are we going to make progress on that? Or is there going to be a backlash somewhere in the middle of the year? But this is a lot of nonsense.
So I think data continues to improve. 10 years ago, the data on ESG was not as much as we have now. We continue to have more reporting standards by boards to report out whether it's gender diversity across their leadership, as well as their practices within environmental and social and governance issues. So the data is going to improve. But again, it's a very personal investing decision. And within ETFs, it's more of a democratized vehicle. So there's always going to be some sort of disagreement there, because you might have a oil servicing company in an ETF that is just excluding reserves, and that's exactly what it should be doing.
I think to your point, I think the social component is the first component that will render itself redundant. Meaning, look at the Fortune 500. They won't all have female CEOs, but you will definitively see across every industry more women on boards, more women in leadership positions. And all of a sudden, you'll wake up one day, and I hope it's soon, and you'll realize every S&P company now conforms to the S part of ESG. Right. And so it no longer needs to be its own fund. Its own fund.
What happened about that? This was all a bit of a joke in the industry a couple of years ago. Everybody said, of course we support the concept of ESG. There was no money in it. And all of a sudden, in the middle of last year, Europe was ahead of us, but not in the U.S. Last year, all of a sudden, money started coming in a big way. What happened in the zeitgeist that all of a sudden ESG became an actual, real, people are putting money into this?
A lot of it was building mind share, education around that. I always say there's a lot of mind share in ESG, not a lot of market share, and we saw flows come in, so it's a little bit of a start. But I think a lot of the strategies we're seeing now are taking the approach of being optimized through a risk constraint. So from an asset allocation perspective, you're not having a lot of performance deviation to the S&P 500 or the ACWI, and that's helpful. But meanwhile, you're upweighting those firms that score positively on ESG.
I think there's a specific catalyst to answer your question. I think two things. A lot of this started as a counter reaction to Trump's environmental policies. I do think that galvanized people and it forced people to look more closely at what they're investing in. But the more proximate, specific thing that happened was what Nike did with Colin Kaepernick. I think that was a clarion call to large companies in America that said, you know what? You take a risk, you go out on a limb on social issues, and Dick's did it with banning certain types of guns from their stores. I think corporations last year, I don't want to say got woke because it's cliched, but there were some concrete things that Nike did with the Kaepernick campaign that woke everyone up to say, you know what, there's actually money in taking a stand on certain issues.
I think woke is not too extreme a word to use, and I agree. I think climate change interest in climate change generically was the principal catalyst that we saw. Women's issue is as well, but I think climate change.
But we also saw
main.
institutional money really show up, and I think the advisors and retails tend to follow big moves by institutions. Two of the biggest launches last year were huge ESG launches with international money coming in, hundreds of millions of dollars out of the gate in new funds. Mm-hmm. That tends to move the needle for people.
And when Larry Fink wrote that impassioned letter, that was an echo that reverberated around the world, or a letter which reverberated around the world.